Just water, folks. Whistle needs to get Tucker Doyne in the middle, and we have Mr. John Osborn. These men, probably high 40s, their age, and they probably can get us about 120 years of history. So we'll ask them a lot of questions, and none of us here are experts, so if we get stumped, that's all right. And the more questions you will ask, the better our whole response will be. And we plan on doing more of these, not just one every now and then. We want more people to participate like this. We also want some of the ladies in Farmville. I have a hard time with getting ladies to participate in giving histories. And frankly, they know a lot. When you're talking to them on a one-to-one basis, they have a recollection that far exceeds us men. But they don't feel like they can talk to us. So if we make them feel good this way, and maybe we could get them in a panel and get all of that insight and wisdom they share with us. So tonight, I'm going to kind of just moderate and field the questions, and Bob's going to help me. Bob Flippin is our treasurer. And Bob is, when it's dull, we think we have to figure out another question to ask. So don't let us be dull. We might be put on the spot. We'll just open it up. First, have a remark or two from the persons on the panel. They can talk about anything they want for a moment or two. And anybody that wants to go first, that's just fine. Mr. Osborn told me this afternoon he had something to say, so he's on the spot.
I have one thing I want to talk to you a little bit. If somebody will pass this out. Mr. Allen, the present postmaster here in Farmville, took it upon himself to find out who was really postmaster. When they started, you know, stagecoach used to bring lunch, and of course the Randolphs came here to where the stagecoach stopped, and they were the first family here. And in 1800, which would make it 200 years ago, the post office department started. Now, whether that's the beginning of the post office, I do not know. But if you read that, I didn't have but 20 of them. You might have to share one of them. The reason I took a special interest in it is Mr. Allen was trying to find out, nobody seemed to know who were the old postmasters. It just so happens that my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Anderson Wharton, was postmaster for 25 years. There's a little catch in that. he had the first building here, so if it had a post office, it had to have it in his building. And that was a common practice that these merchants had the post office. Mr. Allen has already served 18 years. He wants to, one of the reasons he researched this so thoroughly was that he wanted to be the one who had served the longest. So he's got 6 more years to go to make it the longest. One other little thing I want to mention to you, Thomas Anderson Morton was one of the first merchants, came from over in Charlotte, and business wasn't too slow, wasn't too good, so he turned the post office over to his brother, who served a year or 2, and then in 1805 he came back from Charlotte and took the store over and started running, which shows you that Farmville had a hard time getting started. It really didn't get started much until the 1830s, something like that, long 1839, and so on. I think that about covers it. I'm sorry I didn't have enough for everybody, but some of you all don't care about them, and some of you can look at them. It might be a bit, it might not. So let's ride it down.
Jack, I'd like to ask you a question. What reason was you saying the post office had a hard time starting?
No.
It's because they had a post office with every 4 miles.
Yeah, that's probably true.
The closest one I know, the old house is still standing over here where Mr. Fobbs used to live. Catfish Fobbs. What was his name?
Rodney Fobbs.
Rodney Fobbs. What was the name of that post office? That house was a post office.
I know the house, but I didn't mean to imply the post office got hard times on it, but Farmville didn't do much at first. And of course, the post office was over at Morton's Inn, and that was his business. He had an inn over in Charlotte, and he came over here hoping to improve business standards and heard about Farmville started. He came over here. And of course, when he built the store, it was diagonally across the street, over there where Susie's was. And that's where, in the post office, it may have stayed the post office in the old inn, or it may have been moved over there. I don't know that. But it was in one of those 2 places at first. Of course, you all know a lot of these men that are on here.
Oh, thank you.
Where was the home that Robert was talking about, the Forbes home?
It's, if you went up here, Woodland Hall, you know where it is up here on 460. If you went due north, across the river, and they crossed the river at Sandy Ford. And this house was, you can see it now, it's still standing, but I don't think it's too good a repair. Ed Stimpson's dog bought it, and I don't know.
It's right between Anderson's home and the Crawley home, back in there.
Right,
and
straight back
that
on the road.
That used to be the way you went. That was the main road. They even, until, I don't know, 35, something like that.
It came out on 15 up there, just on the north side of the bridge. That road went through. I remember once I tried 4 horses from here with Mr. Ball up to the ball with the cabin, which is 15 miles. I went up that rate way so it wouldn't have the traffic. And one of the horses led so good, I said, well, I'm just going to turn him loose. So he pulled him by the arm. I have 2 on 1 arm. So got up at that third horse, whirled around, came all the way back to the farm. I had to go back. Taught me something. Don't trust him. Take him home.
The only reason I was familiar with the house that I used to hunt up there. Mr. Fobbs took a liking to my son, and he allowed us to hunt. Nobody else hunted up there. That's why I understood what Rob was talking about.
Before you leave Mr. Morton's store down here, Susan's antique shop,
Yeah.
the thing burned, that block burned, was 1926 or before.
I think it was about 43.
On the 3 horses. If you all turn down 2nd Street, you'll see the old brick foundation and a handmade brick on it up to the 1st floor. And they pull it wall down so you can set the new joists on the old wall. you'll see the change in the brick line all the way down. It also has an arch in there over a window that was there. The street was filled in since then. Used to be a bar room under there, I've heard.
Well, I hope my father can't hear me, but my mother's people migrated from Thomas House and Boyd. That's what he did. And, you know, all these inns served a little liquor. And you can keep up with him pretty good over in Charlotte because you can find out when you had a liquor license and you find out when you had one over in Prince Edward that he quit having one over here and went back and got one over there. So it's pretty easy to catch him when you look in the tax records and find it.
Well, things were so different in those days. There was a mill, a flour and grist mill, on the rivers and the creeks, and they were within 7-8 miles of each other. Well, the way they collected the toll in the different islands, you know, still in those mills, they took 1/8 toll for milling your grain. And then the mills accumulated all this grain, and there was no market for it. So they had to do something, so they all built big steel houses. And worked it up, and whiskey was easy to be portable and always a market. And I know the numbers of them. One of them was Buck Asia had up at the cutback place. And another one was over at Caserta. They had a big mill over there. Mr. Albert Baldwin, my wife's great grandfather had over there. And all of them, every one of those mills had a steel house go along to use up that total wheat and the other grain. But it was a bad thing to a certain extent, because every one of these gentlemen I mentioned, let the whiskey get more important to the business.
One of the other things you were talking about that, and a lot of these people, you can remember this, the merchants were kind of like bankers, and they would do what we call running a farm. And they would charge anything he wanted until he sold his tobacco. Now this is more prevalent up in Prospect there than it probably was in Farmville, but it happened in Farmville too.
Mr. Barrett did a lot of that.
Yes. Commission merchants. The banks didn't do much. If you needed some money, you couldn't borrow any money. It was almost like that. But the merchants ran them. All of these local merchants.
It was fine until you hit a dry year.
Huh?
It was fine until you hit a dry year, and then they couldn't possibly pay their debt, so they could get caught up.
Pass that around. That's a local merchant from over here at Walnut Hill, which is Everett Parker's place, right on top of the hill. And there was Mr. Dupee and somebody else in partnership, and he was a merchant from 1830 to 18. I can't remember. But it's for paper, pens, and some cloth, and that was on Main Street. And he paid taxes from 1830, and that's a pretty easy way to keep up with him. That happened to be one of his bills that he wrote out to somebody. I forgot now who it was to. I can't read it. To Guild, I believe. They were from 1865. I just ran across that lately. Mr. Dupee lived over there at Parker's, and his wife had TB. They thought if they get out in the country, that they'd be better. So they took her, this lady over there, and we're talking about now 1830 to 1865. There were a lot of other merchants too, but I just happened to have that bill. And the price of the pens and the cloth is interesting. I think I said enough. Go ahead, Doc.
I haven't got anything to say. I can't go quite back to 1865.
Well, now, remember, I wasn't back there. Some people get after me very frequently about that.
But I remember Jack's father was preaching, call him Preacher Osborn.
Yeah.
And he preached for years, and then he ran the store down in Cumberland, and he retired, and he preached up at Alchemax PD Church. That was one of the churches that he preached at, and one of the Baldwins up there died, and of course they were kin to everybody in the neighborhood. And Chelsea's had a whole bunch of children, and the Taylors had a whole bunch. And anyway, the church was just packed with people. And Mr. Osborn was mighty outdone. We call him Preacher Osborn. He was mighty outdone because so few people came to church, but had such a big turnout at the funeral. He said, I'm not going to preach a funeral today because this is the biggest crowd I've ever seen in this church. And he said, I'm going to preach y'all a sermon. And he said, I take from my text that bundle of sin and pulled it like I hardly could. And I had worked my way into the back of the church. People were standing all outside, and I went my way through the crowd there and all. And he said again, what's keeping people from coming to church on Sunday is that bundle of sin. I said, my gracious, what in the world is that? I reckon some poor woman, girl done got herself in trouble or something. Finally, he came out and he let us know what the bundle of sin was. The bundle of sin was a Sunday newspaper. So he preached the sermon of not coming to church. That bundle of sin was keeping them from coming to church.
I guarantee you that wasn't the only time they did that.
I got a story to tell you on Mr. Osborn. I never had the pleasure of meeting the gentleman. But Mr. John Garnett lived here on 2nd Avenue, but he was one of these people like Edward Carter was. He was a supervisor in Cumberland County, but he lived in Prince Edward for years, didn't he, Jack?
Yes, on the high hill.
Yeah, and they had High Hill Plantation Farm down there. Well, High Hill is just that. The river comes around and runs right like I was going to run in that cup. And the High Hill is right here. So the river couldn't go through it, so it went around. And the place was called High Hill. Well, they had a terrible drought. And Mr. Garnett was a restless kind of gentleman anyway. They were maybe 2 generations ahead of me, but they were a little bit precocious. They would, whatever they want to do or say they did, just did that. Anyway, it was a real dry spell. Mr. Garnett finally got disgusted. He said, well, I'm going to plant my crop right away. So he plowed up and he disc down and he dragged it down and planted his crop. And Mr. Osborn called, and he really had the land real soft and nice. The only man that planted. Mr. Osborn called it a day of prayer. So they had a day of prayer down there. And they prayed all day, the way I heard it. And about 2 days later, it rained up and rained and rained and rained. And it washed all Mr. Garnett's crops down the hill in the road. So Mr. Garnett met Preacher Osborn on the street. And he said, Preacher, I know you had a day of prayer down there. The rain. Mr. Osborn said, yes, we were certainly blessed with a beautiful rain. He said, well, Preacher, the next time you pray for land, you leave High Hill out.
I wasn't privileged to that.
Huh?
I said, I wasn't privileged to that.
You hadn't heard that?
I heard it from you, but I mean, at the time, I don't remember. Oh, Mr. Garnett did have a nice farm there. Oh, it was excellent farm.
He was a good fellow?
Let's hear
Yeah,
some.
yeah, Jamestown, that's where farm should have been. If that had been James Randolph, it would have been.
Down there at Jamestown.
Goes right into it.
Yeah, well, that's where the boats used to come up to Jamestown. The back toes.
Was that the Mr. Garnett that used to ride around on the horse?
His brother.
Right.
So Joe Dodd was.
Ms. Garnett taught school. You remember Ms.
This is
Ms.
John
Garnett?
Grace.
We had questions.
I do.
Robert, was Mr. John Garnett real active in Farmville Methodist Church?
Yes.
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
he taught me Sunday
Yes,
school
he
when
was.
I
He
was
was
a
fine
very
lady.
little girl.
Finally.
I remember, yeah. She was one of my son's school teachers.
I don't think they left her, left out here, to
Joe has a question.
I have a question, since Judith Randolph's name has come up. Since Farmville is endowed to her for the property that the town of Farmville is built on, I wanted to ask Jack, do you know where a cemetery is located on the Bazaar Plantation? And if so, are there any marked graves on it?
If you go over there and go back to the mill house, and up on top of the hill, before you go down to the house, one of those Randolphs is buried inside of a metal fence. I shamed myself that I don't know his name, but I think it's one of the Richards and John's brothers.
His name was,
Theodore?
Theodore?
Godric, that was his name.
Yeah.
No.
Theodric,
Right.
that was his name. There's another cemetery over there, and that must have been a slave cemetery, because, it's on a, just, inside of the river, there's a strip of land moves across the streets of the river. It's a real high, low knoll, and you can drive a pickup down there, and like you drive on top of a causeway or something, like narrow, you can fall off on both sides. And a number of graves there, but there's no markers.
Is this a marked stone, Mr. Osborn? No, is it a?
I can't remember sometimes since I've been back in there, but there was a metal, I mean a nice metal fence with set in stone and everything.
You know,
We could find out easy enough exactly who he
Is that right above where the canal comes in by
Yeah.
now?
was. Yeah, on top.
Give you a point of reference.
Have you ever seen it?
I've never seen it.
Well, it's a
I
big
wasn't.
oak tree right there, and it's right on the side of the road. As you go down the hill.
go down to the house.
Yeah, on the left.
I'll go there tomorrow and see if I can. Another point of reference, we were showing that last meeting, we were showing that brick pier that the bridge came across. Well, this cemetery is just across the river from that, maybe up the river. It's right at the river. Y'all talking about commission merchants a while ago. My grandfather bought a store in 1895. And I brought lots of pictures of y'all, like to see what the country store looked like in 1890, around 1895.
Where to have that store?
It's not a brick store on the left, right at the river.
Oh, yeah.
You can picture.
This Farmville,
Put them up, there were several coming, yeah, that's probably.
he's got it. It was
See this
pretty,
railroad rails right here? That's
Oh,
the-
yeah.
that's the-
Yeah.
And my grandfather's house said right here. Then old big wags on the corner with Mike and Johnny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron, was Mr. Carson's tax office right here somewhere?
Yes, ma'am.
That's well, yeah.
And that little building on the right, you see,
Uh-huh.
that was bar.
A barber and pay.
Run by Mr. Albright, who was the black spots.
We mentioned post office a while
Give
ago.
it to me.
Farmville Post Office? Where was the Farmville Post Office?
In that building right there, the first place I knew it was.
That's
In
Prospect.
that brick store, there are two fronts and two, sets of double doors going in. One of them went in the post office. Prospect in the store front. That's right.
In Farmville, where was the post office before what is now the federal building, which used to be the Farmville
Well,
Post
Oh, it
Office?
was in the middle of the block there somewhere.
Well, right down here on the corner, it went to the federal building.
Susan.
Oh, federal building was not so.
Yeah, before it was a federal building. That was about 1912, 14.
I don't know what.
obviously, the first one was down on the corner there, Second and Main. Now, which corner it was on, I don't know, but before they had a post office, we had mail service, all those were carried by the stagecoach, and it stopped there at Mortonville.
Didn't you all say a while ago, was that Susan?
That was a pit.
Right across the street.
But after
This
that,
store was Susan.
Okay.
The store was Susan, but you remember the old building behind the Prince Hotel?
Yeah, that's the wagon, the whole
That
bed.
was moved in. And am I correct?
I can remember when that inn was in that basement.
Behind the Pritchard
Behind the
Hotel.
Pritchard
They
Hotel,
knocked it
second.
down when that,
Anything fell in?
Flip has a picture of it.
That's very why I was going to school.
Flip has a picture of it.
Which one?
Of the Morton's Inn.
Oh, yeah, Morton Tavern, yeah.
And that probably was the first building in Farmville.
Looks like there was a, right back of the Prince Edward Hotel there, Franklin ran a clock.
When that man, right behind the first house in the bank,
Okay.
he went to
On
the
Third
little
Street.
building, yes, on Third
Right.
Street. Then the next house down was Miss Madeline Walker.
Right,
Yeah.
had that brick fence.
You go behind where Baldwin's store used to be, it's part of that, stone fence still there.
That, the gate post is still there.
Part of it's there.
Happened to be my mom's sister's God.
Miss Madeline Walker was one of the true characters that I've been in this town.
That's true. That's a beautiful old home, too.
That was beautiful. But she got just as broke as she could be in the last, during the Depression. And I tell a little anecdote on it that happened some years prior to the Depression. Lewis Hubbard's daughter, Margaret, was not as popular as she would like to be. So Miss Madeline was a pretty lady. She'd go up the street and every second or third man she'd have to kiss him. You remember that time? Kissed on you some, didn't she?
She was a beautiful lady, I remember that.
Anyhow, this Margaret went over and said, Miss Madeline, I'm going to ask you some advice. Said, now, I'm not as popular as I'd like to be. Boys don't seem to do much sense to me. I know you've been popular all your life, and I want to know what you do. He said, well, Margaret, you got to be fair. So you draw a line. You say, I'm not going any further with this. But then if you're not getting along well, step right over.
Another familiar lady on Main Street was Miss Sally.
Well, see, I knew you were going to say that. You tell us about that.
No, but she'd come down all dressed up with that high collar.
Yeah.
And
And
that
face
face all
all
done
painted
up,
Little bit of hat up here.
just stepping.
By the way,
She was kind of blind too, and she put powder all over her face.
Questions from the audience? I know some of you are just waiting.
Let's hear some questions from some of the audience. They haven't asked a question.
Anything? Oh, wait.
I'd like to, go ahead. I'd like to ask Ms. Taylor to elaborate on the Indian mound that you directed Dr. Jordan to, and what did you find there?
well, I found it when I was a kid, hunting and fishing up that river. But it's a huge thing. It's 10 times as big as this building. It was built almost 2.5 acres in it. And it was about 4 feet tall. And it had to be done for nothing but, well, the Indians supposedly built it, but they had nothing but a woven basket or it must have taken years and years to carry it up 40 feet. Basket or a piece of deer hide or something to haul that dirt in, take it up there and dump it. But they were found a lot of artifacts in that. I worked with Dr. John, who was one of the kids and they were having a great time up there. And then Bob Smith had a place there, Robert Smith. And when Bob died, they sold it, and Dickie bought it. And Dickie told him, said, yes, you can go ahead over there all you want and see what you can find, but be careful and shut my gates and don't go in there when it's too muddy and have my fields up. Of course, college kids don't pay too much attention to that kind of stuff. So they got those four-wheelers and they plowed and when Dickie went in there and found it, get off, don't come back. So that's why there's been no more prospecting, research done there. Am I right, Ken?
Yes, sir. And this place is located on the
Right
back
at the
end of
intersection
Germantown
of
Road.
Buffalo Road and Abnett. But it also flows, it's almost right angles in it, it flows into the, Appomattox. And in that intersection, 2 acres, more than 2 acres, it's still maybe 20, 25 feet high. You think?
Yeah. I've often wondered why that mound was there.
That's why it's the Indian man,
Yeah.
which are all over the country,
All the
various
rest
places.
is low.
Was they bury things under?
Man,
Did they bury things under?
could you address that and tell us what you do?
I wouldn't, it was probably some sort of ceremonial mound that they would worship spirits. Probably in some relations to the sunset or the sunrise or the north or the stars.
Go ahead.
But I'm not qualified to say any more than that.
We had a Dr. Graham up at Longwood, and he wrote some material about what he found there. He seemed to think some of them were Mexican Indians.
Is that right? I'll ask Dr. Jordan about that tomorrow.
Dr. Graham,
Yeah.
I heard him talking with Dr. Granger.
Granger, Miss Granger.
Well, Miss Granger did, though.
She had
Got
a
into a
world
lot
of
of
that.
that artifacts on
Yeah.
Buffalo there,
Yeah.
off of Germantown Road.
I wondered what happened to all of it.
She
I
said
I
that,
have some pictures of her. You might like to have one of those.
that's the reason they named the Wine Oak Hotel on account of Miss Granger, the Wine Oak Indians.
Indian.
She used to
I
come
used to have a
to,
big collection of arrowheads I used to find around, back of that, around in that section.
They fell down a lot of that type of stuff over there. So,
she used to come to College Church, I think she was a member. And I remember, we had a picnic or something like that, and she brought ice cream in little paper cups in a bushel basket. I don't know.
well,
I don't have, she kept it from melting, but it didn't. I remember that bushel bag for ice cream.
where did Mary Granger?
Oh,
I graduated from high school.
doesn't she live out on the upper end of High Street?
I don't know.
Like, before you get into,
Before you get over to Germantown Road,
yeah,
on the right hand
I
side.
think. Just drive around town and find that little green car.
You gonna give us some questions?
You got to snoop. Sorry. Questions, I know Lucy has one.
Oh, okay. I'm Lucy Doyne, and I'm going to ask this question of my father, Tucker Doyne, because his grandson, David Simpson, has these questions. You answered the first question about the bundle of sin. That was his first question. His second question is, how many chickens does it take to sell tobacco?
How many what?
How many chickens does it take to sell tobacco?
Oh, that tobacco question, well, that tale goes back to Mr. Hubbard, used to run the warehouse there, right there where Dick Carter got that record there. And this fellow named Jim brought a load of tobacco in his wagon, and they had to go down on the bottom of that cab with the wagons, parked down under there. And left the load of tobacco, unloaded up there and put on the floor, and he told Mr. Hubbard, said, I got to go uptown and see about some business. Said, I'll come back after a while and after sale and pick up my money. And Mr. Hubbard said, yeah, well, I'll take care of it for you. So after a while, he came back and he went up to Mr. Hubbard and said, well, look, how much did my tobacco bring? Mr. Hubbard said, well, Jim, I'm sorry to tell you, but your tobacco didn't bring enough to pay the warehouse cost. The warehouse cost was $2. Said, I paid it out of my pocket. And Jim said, Lord, Mr. Hubbard said, I ain't got any money. Said, I got a house full of children, and I haven't got a cent of money. But said, I'm going to pay you that $2. And Mr. Hubbard said, that's all right, Jim. Don't worry about it. I'm glad to pay it for you. Well, Jim said, well, now, Mr. Hubbard, I do have some chickens at home, and next time I come to Farmville, I'm going to bring you a chicken for that $2 I owe you. I hate to owe anybody anything. So it wasn't long after that he came to Farmville and came walking into the warehouse and had a chicken under each arm. And I walked up to the tub and said, I brought that chicken that I owe you pay for that wage charge. He said, well, Jim, you didn't owe me but one chicken. He said, yeah, but I brought another load of tobacco.
It was really that bad.
It was.
Tobacco sold for 50 cents a hundredweight. And, you couldn't get away with 400 or 500 pounds on wagon.
They could drive wagons down under that place. I don't know where they ever been that called Charlie's place, but it's like a door there. You could drive the wagon back in and put your horses and all back in. Sometimes people spend the night there.
I know good many old wagon stories that I can't tell y'all.
Well, that,
Incidentally, the stall is still back there.
Some of
Yeah,
them.
They were still in some still
They
out.
had stalls for about 40 mules under, with a name, Charlie's Restaurant.
Jim?
they still refer to that parking lot, those farmers that brought the tobacco in, as the wagon lot.
Yeah.
They still call it the wagon lot, because that's where they park the wagons. Where's Charles parking lot?
Thank you.
Daddy, tell us a little bit about Martha Jane Hart and some of her relatives and their contribution in farm. Her brothers and.
Well, Martha Jane was kind of an eccentric person. Her father owned the farm with her, and he also owned the opera house, which is over top of the farm with her. You had to go up some steps to go to the opera house, and the farm with her was right there where the town office is now. And he had, it was just a small paper. And Martha Jane was a child who he didn't have children until he was quite old. And another one was Scooty Hart, I remember you remember Scooty. And Willard, who was vice president of the bank, and Mr. Shears was the president. And Martha Jane, I don't think she ever combed her hair. So no.
Daddy.
And,
She did like this.
taught piano.
I was gonna say she did.
Taught, she
Yeah.
was a piano. She played the piano beautifully. And every time she had one of her piano recitals, I had to get the chair and probably take them up to her house and set them up for her piano recital. Anyway, my children wanted to take, in those days, you know, you had to take piano lessons as a part of being part of the community, and they wanted to take piano lessons, so we didn't have any money, and Martha Jane agreed to teach my oldest daughter, and she said, my wife made a bargain with us, and Martha Jane said, we'll give you food. She said, I'd rather have food than money. So every time we'd have something extra at house, I'd take it down to Martha Jane. And that's the way we got our piano lessons undertaken for the children, because we kept Martha Jane. She had a cook. She didn't know how to cook herself, but she had a cook. She always liked somebody else's food, and especially my wife's, in preference to anything else. And that's the way they got the piano lessons. But none of them ever learned how to play the piano.
Lucy did. And she had that connection to Chapel Store.
Oh, yeah, she's been down at Chapel Store every day. That's
I heard you spent a lot of time about it.
Easy blushing.
yeah, she was an unusual person. And the girls took the piano, but they never did practice. And
Everywhere she went, she walked.
oh, yeah.
I can remember seeing
Yeah.
her.
My children just as afraid of as they could be. She looked a little wild if didn't know.
You will, that's right.
You know.
We have one more question here.
I was just, I took piano lessons of Mark Jane Hart. So I had to walk, to the house on First Avenue. My first piano teacher was over here, the stucco house right across from Farmville Methodist Church on Randolph Street. It was called the Concert. It's right there where Dr. Clark's old house sits. It's the stucco house is still there. That was my first piano teacher, and her name was Miss Schroeder.
Sweet.
Schrader. Okay, she was German, and she wrapped me up a whole lot of times with a ruler. And I was probably about 8 years old or so, and then I was very unhappy with her, and my mother knew it. And so then my next piano teacher was Mrs. Elliott down on 3rd Street. So I walked down that many afternoons. And then Martha Jane Hart came along in there somewhere. But by the time I was ready to go into the 8th grade at Farmville High School, I had it with piano lessons, and Mother did let me quit.
Martha Jane lived down behind the jail, back in there. The house was down there where the old jail used to be. And the town bought it from there, and Willard built a house up there on the High Street.
First Avenue.
First Avenue. Yeah. And Willard was the vice president of the Conference magazine, and she was president. And when Mr. Hart died, of course, all the property was sold, Diary Wall bought the paper, and Dr. Whitaker and some others bought the theater, the opera house or whatever it's called. And we used to have silent movies, and we used to have at the opera house, and that too, we used to have blackface, and that's the way they raised money for the community, that have a show. Minstrel show, yeah, that's what they call it. And they allowed them to do blackface back in those days. And my daddy always loved to be in those things. He liked to be in those plays, and the more people you could get in there, the more people you would draw, because and he was always one of the, what you call an in man here, that told jokes, and
He was lucky.
yeah. He came out on the stage one time to make an announcement, and he started talking, and somebody way back up in the peanut gallery, called the peanut gallery, back in the back up on the top gallery, hollered and said, "Louder!" So my father picked up his voice a little bit higher and started talking again. This same person hollered again, "Louder!" My dad picked his voice up a little bit higher, started again, and then the man hollered again and said, "Louder!" And my dad stopped and put his hands on his hip and said, "When St. Peter blows his horn, some fool in the peanut gallery is going to holler louder."
Remember Mr. Swift?
Oh, yeah, very well.
That used to lie around, and what was it Mr. Swift said to your father used to walk every Sunday morning across the river with the dog. Yeah. Anyway, what did Mr. Swift say to him? You wouldn't find Jesus Christ walking on Sunday morning with a dog? Yeah, and your father said that to him, wouldn't see him driving no milk wagon either.
The Bill house, on that dog.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the old part of that old, that was old thing across the river there, and they had a mill house had a dug a trench, a big trench in it.
Yeah.
And that part of that is still there. And that's why the ground corn and wheat there. And Mr. Swift, we used to go to the Methodist church, And he, every time the preacher would say something he thought was very appropriate, he would say, "Amen." And that folks in the Methodist church thought that was not appropriate for a church of God's stature to have somebody saying amen, so they had to call him down on that.
Mr. Swift supplied Farmville with fresh milk,
Yeah.
a lot of fresh milk.
We used to supply Worsham with fresh meat.
Well, I didn't know we got that far, but,
No, my husband and I.
oh, I see. Oh, I'm sorry.
I used to have a little beer of water Furnace
Yeah,
Prospect,
yeah.
Furnace Prospect was good.
Oh.
And I was party to some of the milking and everything. And I know the dead flies and a few germs didn't hurt anybody. Nobody died. I think it affected John Porter Glenn a little bit.
Danny, didn't you say that Scott Hart was more or less responsible for getting Ms. Delaney into our area that did so much
Yeah,
good
he was.
research here?
You know, at one time they were going to renovate the old Randolph House, but that was the name of the place. It was a hotel during the Civil War. You remember that?
Prince Edward.
Yeah, they called Prince Edward Hotel, and later when Mr. Chick took it over, when I knew it was called the Prince Edward Hotel, and then a move got underway to renovate it, and I believe y'all was doing the construction, right?
I don't know about that.
Joe Wood.
Joe Wood was there.
Oh, you told me when the building fell down?
Yeah.
Joe Wood. Yeah, he bought the building.
Put the money up.
Yeah, and he put up some, he hired a real
Yeah.
expensive
Thing
man.
collapsed, the whole thing collapsed. And you lost very much money on it. But Ms. Delaney helped Scott Hart. He was a Holly. And he wrote for the Washington Post and National Geographic. He lived in Washington. And he was interested in this project down here, renovating the old Randolph House and making it into a first-class hotel. And Ms. Delaney helped him to get sober and helped him when he was down and out. And that's the reason he came to Florida.
Ms. Delaney had a crush on him.
Yeah. I don't know what that. Anyway.
I didn't know this part.
He wrote a book.
Yeah, he wrote a book about from Sailor's Creek to Appomattox, and there's a few copies around now. Wood has quite a few of them. I'd have 2 or 3 of them, but I let them get away, and it was the story of from Sailor's Creek to Appomattox. And told the story.
There's a new book out now called The Last 65
You
Days.
talking about Jimmy Carter's book,
It's fast.
1 hour before sunrise.
Yeah, I know.
8 April Days was the
That's
one
by
of
Chris
them.
Carter.
It's a new book. Chris Calkins wrote it. Wrote that book.
It's a good one too, isn't it?
Very interesting. Everything he said, he's done a lot of research.
Of course, he had the governor's money. Took his time, told us a lot of history.
I just finished reading President Carter's book, 1 hour before sunrise. I learned all about killing hogs and that I didn't already know.
You didn't learn, you just got to remember.
Well, you know, the big landowners in this section back then was the Randolph Bazaar Plantation over here, which no longer exists, but they do have a mark out on the road. And that was what Jack was referring to a while ago. And Mr. Jackson, we lived in the Wade House. Some of y'all might know where that is, on Beach Street. And Mr. Jackson lived next door, and he owned that place over there and farmed it. And he had a horse. He kept a horse in the backyard, and he had a colored man that tended to his horse, and called Uncle William. And he had a colored woman that did the cooking, and she had 2 little boys, and I used to play with them. And Mr. Jackson would ride his horse to his farm every horse right there in the backyard, and rode over there every day to see about the farm. And he let me hunt over there, and my dad, there's a lot of squirrels over there, and my dad, he wouldn't let anybody hunt on the place, and my dad asked him, could he take me over there to shoot some squirrels? He said, Tucker, I'll let you take them, but you have to let your boy do the shooting now. You promised me you'd let your boy do the shooting. I don't want you shooting. And I had a little old 410 gun. I think I finally killed 1 or 2 squirrels. And then Mr. Swift, we used to go to his place and hunt too. He let us come up and go out there and hunt. He had a 10-gauge shotgun. Boy, when that thing went off, it sounded like a candle. And Mr. Swift was a mighty religious gentleman, but he, I think he let his religion go a little bit too far.
You also know Mrs. Obadiah Mann that had the ongoing rummage sale in the basement of the Prince Edward Hotel. She had to walk down the steps to get in like every Saturday. She was in operation.
You said something about Uncle William and Mr. Jackson's daughter, Miss Mary.
Yeah.
All right. He took care of her over there at Bazaar until Miss Mary and Mr. Good got hooked up together. He was a
Describe a little bit of that, Mr. Good, look.
Yankee musician.
Yeah. Played the piano.
Musician. Huh?
He played the piano at the theater.
Some lady has called me about him and she has written a book on Mr. Good.
Is that right? Mr. Good weighed about 300 pounds.
He did.
I
Yeah,
never
he
saw
did.
And he drove a little car and sat that foot like that.
Yeah. He had a great big beard all over his face, and the hair all hung down like, the young people used to have. And that's the first person I've ever seen like that, and we were very much enthralled at him and actually afraid of him.
Looked like a mountain man.
Yeah, he did, but he could play the piano. See, they didn't have any sound then. We had this silent movement, and he played the piano during the movie. And like Rob said, he was a great big man. He came here from somewhere.
Came up from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Tell me this, whatever happened to him?
He died, and I remember.
Did they bury him here?
Yeah, very good.
Bury him here. I know what you're talking about.
I remember the funeral very well because I was just young at the time, and he was so large, and unfortunately he didn't have any money, and Mr. Mary too. They were just in dire straits, and we put him in a casket, the cheapest casket we had, and got him down in it somewhere, I don't know how, but my daddy was afraid the handles would break on the thing when he turned. So he had 2 stout poles sent from the car guy, set the casket on these poles, and they would carry the casket sitting on these poles. He's afraid to trust the handles. Things right very well.
Does Mr. Good have a tombstone?
No, they just put a rock in people's grave.
I was interested in that because this lady called me about writing a book, and I was, if she called me again, I'd like to tell her where it's written.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness, y'all are bringing up all that business.
She did right across the street.
She came down the street one time and she had on a ball dress and nothing under it, so they wrapped her in newspaper.
Two tickets, call down, buck cook.
Grandma, I didn't think what
trees and cars and put on that thing, that horse lifted up. She changed clothes up there. She was quite a character.
Then another one was Miss Newman.
Oh,
yeah. One time in the bank, called Butcher, she had that little dog, Coco,
Yes.
that little poodle, and she was at the window doing business, and remember they had those big columns in the bank, and Claude Butcher hid behind one of those columns. And every time Miss Newman would be doing her business at the window, Claude would stomp at the dog, make the dog misbehave, and Miss Newman didn't know Claude was in it, and she would, you know, Coco minded her. I mean,
He'd been to school.
He'd been to school, and Claude just stood there and just worried that dog to death.
Miss Newman was a character, and none of the columnists liked to work for her. And finally, most of them, and I'm sure, same thing happened over Farm Manufacturing Company that happened to me. They said, we're not going nowhere. She'd make them take the shoes off her door and give them two brown paper sacks. And so she went to the beach one time, and when she left, she called me and said, Robert, you've got to send somebody up here to stop the leak in my house. I got a terrible leak coming out, maybe 2 or 3 of them. And so, you all never know this man, and I couldn't get anybody to go up there. I said, why don't you get sitting? Oh, I wasn't worried sitting them with this. I said, well, you worried me, Miss Newman. She said, well, you sitting up here and do something while I'm at the beach. Well, I had a gentleman named Jim Thompson working for me at that time. Jim chewed a lot of tobacco, kind of ran down the road, and shaved on Saturday. So Jim went up there with his shoes, put on it down. Came back after a while and said, I fixed your leak. I said, well, that's good. So he came back and I called Ms. Newman. So Ms. Newman sent a man up there and he said he fixed your leak. She said, well, that's fine. And the house didn't leak for about 3 months, maybe 4. She called me and said, the leak had come back. So I went up there like a fool, climbed up there, looked at it. And Jim had put 5 or 6 empty paint cans. He'd drive a nail in, wrapped and hang a paint. Head bucket on it, we had a 5 or 6 of them hanging around in the attic. That thing crossed the ocean over
And Miss Newman had her full-time maid was named Rena, and Rena drove a little Model T coupe, and she kept parked Monday through Friday, right in front of the house up here on the corner of Beach Street. Rena the maid, and Rena's apartment was the basement of Ms. Anderson's house.
Well, she was a good lady, but she was a little bit opinionated.
Oh, yeah. And you know, Rachel Wilson told me back in the early 90s that she never did understand, but that Ms. Ann Newman, in the later years of her life, she literally had a cot. Now, this is according to Rachel Wilson. Ms. Ann Newman had a cot. Somebody, Rachel said, kind of in the pantry area of her kitchen. So we got a 20-room house right up here on the corner of Beach Street. And Ms. Ann Newman spent many years sleeping on a cot in, let's call it, the pantry. And Rachel Wilson said, I don't want, I said, don't know. She was eccentric.
Didn't want to mess up her bed.
Right, exactly right, Elmira.
I used to work at Kilkel Laundry, and the delivery man could not take a wrapped up bundle of laundry and lay it on the porch. No way. She wouldn't have it. She sent it back.
Because it would get soiled, the bundle laying on the
The
front
paper
porch.
might.
It's the paper might get soiled, yeah.
I
She
think
wanted a man
Jackson
to hand it to
tell
her.
us about that old house sitting right across the river there. And where the bridge is now, so Jack, I understand from Jack, used to be a ford there, didn't it, Jack?
Well,
And an Indian trail led by that house, and the trees, had some trees pointing to that ford there.
some historians have written about that, but I never have been able to exactly fine, but it's obvious that they did use the springs, because they wanted some good pressure water. And the bridge was not where it is now, but down by the railroad.
Yeah.
Well, Bridge Street.
Yeah, that was
the
before.
name.
And they used to forward right.
Yeah, that's Rutland's Ford.
That was before the railroad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, well, see, the railroad came in 1850, that's when Farmville boomed. That's no
That's
time.
right.
Yeah, every building you can walk into in Farmville, you can almost say it was built in 1852, it's an old red brick building.
You know that, that killed Jamestown too.
Yeah.
There was a little village down the river here,
Yeah.
what, 4 miles? maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, see, you said something about High Hill. When I was a small boy, they used to have warehouses down on the river at High Hill. Somebody went down, took a bulldozer and pushed them all down. Now, they were built out of stone. That's as far as they could get up the river. They couldn't get any further with the boats. And they improved it as time went on. And Jamestown really was a right good-sized town. But when Judith gave them the land, Farmville boomed, that got it started.
No,
The
and
railroad came.
you all took the courthouse away from work.
Yeah, that part of it.
That was about the canals.
That's a little before my time.
Jack, you all tell us about the canals, the aspect of the canal.
Over here, well, the canal, when you're right across the bridge, if you look going that direction to your left, there is a canal that went around Prince Edward Mill. So in 1805, when they built it, the General Assembly required them to make it so boats could get up there. And they went on up the bazaar. And I don't know how much further up the river, but anyway, that made an island. That's not really an island back of Newman's cement plant here, but it is a man-made island. And when they were running the mill, Prince Edward Mill with water, they used to have to send men up there and stop up the canal part so the water would come around and run the mill in the 30s, late and 40s.
Ms. Short asked a question.
Oh, either of you gentlemen, since we're speaking about local characters, how about Miss Sally Butcher? Is that her name? Sally Butcher.
Well, she was the mother of Claude Butcher, right?
I don't think they heard the question.
Miss Sally Butcher.
Butcher, Sally Butcher.
Claude Butcher's mother.
No, we talked about it a while ago, painting face up.
Oh, I didn't
She
hear
was
that.
the one that taught me to paint the face.
It is.
Yeah.
Does anyone know about Mrs. Sally Butcher? Ms. Sally Butcher?
That's the
She's
one
the
that,
one.
That's the one you all are
She was
talking
the one
about.
who was talking about. Some of his writings.
Mrs. Sally Butcher was a Hazel.
As Claude Butcher's mom.
She's the Hazel
Joe
Grove. She
Hazel
Hazel
Grove.
Grove.
Miss Sally.
I know one thing, they had a baby beauty contest, but I've heard this.
No, that's
This was just yesterday. Back in those days, when Claude Butcher was a baby then, and he won the beauty contest as a baby. I don't know whether y'all remember Claude Butcher or not. He wasn't in the great beauty, but he won the beauty contest. He made the beauty contest.
and Mr. McElwain was the bride.
I remember that.
Oh, Butch Gordon.
Butch Gordon was the
Yeah,
bride.
what is
Mr.
it,
McElwain was
Womanless
the
Wedding?
bride.
That's what it was. A womanless wedding.
Yeah.
Mr. McElwain was in superintendent schools, and he was a little mousy man.
Probably weighed 100 pounds.
Mr. Doyne, I'd like to ask you a question about the funeral home. We know that Doyne Burger Funeral Home is one of the oldest in Virginia. Are there records of all the funerals that
No.
say would be of historical significance?
Well, it's a law that you have to have a burial permit, and Mr. Newell, right up there next to you, was the registrar of deeds, and if somebody died, we had to take the death certificate to her house, and she would give me a burial permit. And also get them birth, where she recorded all the births too. And but people that were buried out in the country, they don't know that death certificate was filed by the in Richmond, they give away. But that, of course, before that, there were no birth certificates. People were mostly just buried on the place, and some in church cemeteries.
What I was getting at is maybe they are just business records
Oh,
that are from the old
business
days.
records. No, and none that I have, we will ever kept, no.
Daddy kept cut out obituaries from 1939 to the time that he retired.
The original Doyne building, I don't know how long your grandfather, great-grandfather, built that thing.
I think it's been about 1890, something like that, you know. When it
We got
really
Doyne on the front of it now.
Down on Main Street.
Right across the Third Street from the first night.
Right along where, where Sonny Parrott has his.
Used to make furniture, then he sold, and also made, if somebody died, they had to make a casket from a coffin, you know. And that's the way he got into the, what they call the undertaking business. You know. Then he went into the undertaking and retired. Get away with it.
You all were on Main Street in 1935.
Yeah.
My mother died that year, and I'll never forget walking that long ways to where her casket was set up at the back of that building. I'll never forget it.
It had an elevator in it.
Yeah, I got an old elevator, freight out there, and it run by rope, you know, have to grab that old rope, yeah, pull that rope to make it run.
The building today, what building are we talking
The Doyne building on Main Street.
What building is it?
Yeah.
Is it barber shop?
But I mean, it was, this was a long building.
Yes. They cut about 14 feet off that building.
Yeah, that's when
When
it
they widened Third Street, he took 14 feet off everything on the south side of Third.
Yeah.
I had a building down there that I bought, thought I had whale the deal, but I bought it cheap, and then by the time I cut that 14 feet off and remodeled it, it wasn't as good a deal as I thought it was.
But I tell you, the best deal you had was the 19 and 40 when you had the high water.
Yes,
And washed your lumber away.
yes.
And you got, was it so much money? How much, what was it? Anyway, as a tale goes,
The flood washed away about twice as much lumber as rock.
My name is that door, but it's so hurt
at that time, the people who suffered through that could borrow or get this money for 2%. Just
1%.
1%.
For 40 years.
Yeah, and so what did he do? He reinvested it for how much?
We wasn't out going to all this stuff. Except me.
I thought that was smart.
Mr. Doyne, you didn't bring that polling Mount Airy with you.
Yes, I have
You-
it. It's in the pocket because they
It's such a jovial evening, I think we could hear all this.
This is a real key point.
Actually, it was quite a garden.
No.
Oh, yeah, we didn't mention
It's
it.
in there, Marie. It's
Mr.
folded up.
Noah, Oliver Miller.
Yeah.
Used to drive the bus.
Yeah.
Mr. Miller used to drive the bus.
Miller Blanc.
Miller Flan was that one drove the bus.
Daddy, this is that poem that Billy sent to you.
I understood Mr. Miller Blanton was also the conductor or the engineer on the Tide Wheeler Railroad.
It could have been, but he drove the bus down 45 in Third.
I
Yeah.
remember that very well.
And you used to have the bus at the Continental Hotel on, you stopped at the Continental Hotel on Main Street. have a hotel they call the Continental Hotel Hollywood. And they had a restaurant there too. But all that burned, I think it's like that, in the financial condition, difficulties in the cause.
This is 2 pages long. It's a poem
Yeah.
Dr. Jeffers wrote. And it's in jovialness and friendship. So if any of you are related, kin to these people, or talk of in jest, we'll have to overlook it. And, I think Robert brought it to my attention first, Mr. Taylor. And I passed it along to Tucker because it's about steady. And it's a real piece of work about people that have been in Prince Edward County. And I'm going to read it since I'll just read right here on the line. It's called Old Mount Airy. And Mount Airy was an old home place near Leeds Mountain. So that's the setting, Old Mount Airy.
That was the old Wade place.
The old Wade place and the home that you see there. Wasn't it pleasant, you fellows all, long about this time every fall, about the toils of the day had been done, to cast care aside and gather as one, determined to go out and really have fun, out to Old Mount Airy. It all filters back to us clear tonight, with some of our dear ones no longer in sight. There was old Pot Paulette and Basil Bruce, Uncle Jim Latimer, and Tobacco Juice, and Big Sheriff Clark, but what's the use? We're back at Old Mount Airy. We greeted each other in the upstairs room, where the kerosene lamp tried to pierce the gloom. The best that we sat on, so long as it last, the pot-bellied stove giving forth in gas, and always enough to turn loose the wasp out at Old Mount Airy. Old Archer was there to greet everyone, shake hands, and call him a son of a gun. Then all settled down to the work of the night, to get in the mood, or it wouldn't be right. To pick which professor we'd try to get tight out at Old Mount Airy. By the time the liquor was low in the jug, when TC was giving Tom Allen a hug, the cowbell would ring out its mellow refrain. Although nobody by now was in any pain, we'd all sample the bourbon again out at Old Mount Airy. Huh, gee whiz, what a turkey. Boys, we're in luck. Sheriff Clark is already dishing the pluck. When grace is said, we dig into the grub like a bunch of wild shoots eaten out of a tub. Until things are finished right down to the nub out at Old Mount Airy. When the president rises with the help of an aide and calls upon each one to mind what he said, the language you use will be carefully scanned. Cussing and vile jokes are carefully banned, except a few hells, perhaps I'll be damned, out to Old Mount Airy. Charlie Hop is called on, but makes some excuse. Horace Adams falters. Jack Martin's no use. Sam Holton's a bit lively. Tom Allen's rough. And when Barry speaks, out, we've all had enough. While Simpkins can't see any sense in the stuff out at Old Mount Airy. But there's Tucker Doyne to hear from yet, and JP and Landrum, and least we forget, there's F.O. Jones, and all will agree, got his crazy yarn from CTAG, which Joe Smith and Shorty can't even see out at Old Mount Airy. It all filters back to us clear this night. Oops, that's the same thing. That was written by Dr. George Jeffers, who's a professor at Longwood. Obviously, it was a meeting of professors and good old homeboys having fun. And it sounds like they had a lot of fun.
When was it written? Do you know?
November 21st, 1952.
And a whole lot of us had those gentlemen for professors. We
That's
received
correct.
a
I
lot.
remember Something like that.
Yeah, he was. I remember he wrote a story about Chris Reed, who was quite a character around here. I don't know what any of y'all ever remember.
A little man, big man in a little town. I got it.
He used to carry special delivery letters up to the college, you know, it cost 10 cents to send a special delivery letter. These boys that were love sick would send a special delivery letter. Anyway, he always had something funny to say. And when the Lindbergh child was kidnapped, you know, and Bruno Richard Hoffman, you know, was jailed for the kidnapping. And Chris carried papers, and he was advertising his papers. Read all about it. Bruno Richard Hoffman executed. And read all about it. Bruno Richard Hoffman executed. He said, well, Rich, we hadn't heard anything about him being executed. He said, yeah, somebody sent him a fruit cake and he sat on it and the currents shocked him to death. Then when he held the court,
The TC we remember his father was TC. Was the railroad man.
yeah, he was a railroad detective. He kept the bombs off the railroad. He wore a pistol on his hip. We thought that was everything he
And his coat sat right up here where Delicio's office is built now.
Tucker, you know
That
the
was
one
Poland
about,
House.
the one about the time?
Yeah, tell them about the time now. You know, they built the courthouse down here, and they had the tower up there, and you know, most courthouses have a clock up there on it. And they were debating, well, put a clock up there, because it cost a lot of money to put a clock up there. And somebody asked old Chris, said, Chris, you think we ought to put a clock up there? He said, no, I don't think we need a clock. Said, oh, Judge Watkins will give me time. He said, didn't need a clock, but the judge would give me time.
And it's only have something like 15.
Oh, yeah, we had 21, too.
There was an end to that.
Ian did 24.
And that
Same way, 24 children.
Chris Reed, I think, had 15.
Was Chris Reed the shoe shine man
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
hotel? Okay.
He whistled up and down the street.
Oh, yeah, he whistled all the time.
Oh,
Yeah, he did.
Before we get too long into this, a lot of fun. It's going way better than I thought. A lot of fun having a chuckle and learning history at the same time. But Tucker Doyne's family has got something special they want to share with us tonight, too. And he's got some of his daughters here, Mary and Tracy. Marie, sorry. So three are here. And I'll let Mary tell you what it's all about. Let her be the spokesman about this. And then you can kind of ask questions, carry on and do what we need to do.
When I moved back to Farmville to be here with Mother and Dad, my sister Lucy and I bought a home on the corner of 2nd and Bridge Street. And at the time, Ms. Delaney told Dad it was one of the oldest homes in Farmville. And of course, we were very excited about being owners of something that was very old in Farmville, because we had decided we were going to be two eccentric old ladies in Farmville. But circumstances changed, and it became necessary for us to make other arrangements for the house. And those arrangements, we've talked with some people in Farmville, we've talked with some state people, and we've put our heads together with Billy Polston and Bob Flippin and some of the others in town. And the house is going to be, hopefully, in the not too distant future, a family historic museum for Farmville and Prince Edward County. The property has a large yard that extends to the church right behind it, and we,
Is that the Wilkerson House?
used to be the Wilkerson home.
Okay.
And it still has the detached kitchen in the back, you know, the little separate building. But there's a pretty good yard in the back, and we're hoping that that will be established for a memory garden, rose garden, something of that fashion. Some of the garden clubs I've talked with are interested in helping us with that project. So in order to get a little enthusiasm going for the community, we have talked with Billy Holston, and he has talked with his board. We'll have an open house there November the 11th, which is a Sunday afternoon, for the community, for Farmville and Prince Edward County, for families to come through and see this maybe the oldest or one of the oldest homes within the town limits now. Our understanding is it was built maybe in 1836, 1838. We don't have not done the research on the home, which we will certainly work on, won't we, Bob? But we would like to invite you, the Historic Society, and the Doyne family would like to invite you to come for this tour through the house on Sunday, the 11th of November, from 2 to 4.
Rachel Wilson told me, I'm not sure if she was correct or not, but she told me back in the 90s that the Bliss House right across Corner Street from the Wilkerson House. Maybe I misunderstood. But the Bliss House is kind of old.
Yeah, it's very old.
And Rachel used to talk about that quite a bit.
A lot in that area are quite old. Some of the homes in that area are quite old.
That house belonged to Mr. Hemberg, and he was a town photographer. He was born down where the town municipal office is. It was a log cabin when he was born. And I can't pronounce this word, but he was a picture man. They took pictures. They call him a dermatologist or something like that.
Kind of like a camera artist.
Yeah.
But Bob has some good ideas for things that we could maybe do there, and so does Billy and a lot of other people. But we're hoping in that English basement maybe to have some genealogy workshops and just all sorts of exciting things to get the community and the young people interested in learning and studying about their families and to honor their families in our community.
I personally think it's a great gesture that the family would do such a wonderful thing to give Farmville a museum. And a museum for all people, one that takes care of all historical facts. And I believe it's not just the Doyne family. It is a Doyne family, but it doesn't touch the Venable family too.
Well, as Daddy, my grandmother,
I don't know all the
Daddy's mother
genealogy.
was
I read a little bit.
related to the Venables. And,
Yeah, so it
there's
touches some of
a
the
lot of-
oldest names in Farmville, which means it touches a whole lot of the descendants of those people and the in-laws of those persons. We just think it's a fantastic opportunity. We should make the best use of it that we can. And as a community, we'll have to get behind it because it's not just something that doesn't take any out of it. It'll take a lot out of it. So the details will have to be worked out, but it's a wonderful thing to do. And I'm glad that Mr. Doyne is here tonight with his daughters to deliver it to us firsthand. Thank you, Mary. All right, back to questions. And if you're getting tired, you can say so and we'll quit, or we can keep going.
You know, back not too awful many years ago, some of us had high hopes for the McKinley House on Beach Street to be the historic museum.
We are aware of the pitfalls and the
George-
obstacles.
George Parrish did a gorgeous job on that house.
Well, he would still come out good in the end. Usually takes some work
Yes.
in the beginning. And we are well aware of the cost and the work associated with it. We think we can get it
in very good shape.
The
We've
house
had
is in perfect
historic properties, people tell us that it's in
Did David
amazing good
Statson
shape.
kind of try to do some, David Statson?
David Statson was the owner that Lucy and I
But
bought
did he
from.
kind of try
He did
to-
a lot of the renovation himself. He loves that home. It's related to the Wilkersons through marriage.
Jonathan Frank's brothers.
Yeah, they lived on.
It was really only owned by just a few families, and I think that was one of the reasons the house is in such good shape today.
Yes. It's also in the second edition to the original Judith Randolph survey, which is the first physical survey. It's in that, the first edition of land. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Bolson, this is really big news to me, and I was just wondering if you all had thought about it to the point that you might describe what this is going to be like, say, 10 years from now, if most of your plans come to fruition. What would this be 10 years from now?
Other than talking to Barry and Bob and I have only been the privy ones into society, other than having permission from our board to go ahead with fact-finding and gathering a few details. Tonight we discussed it pretty thoroughly before this meeting, the board did, and I discussed the same things that Barry delivered to us all generally here. I see it as a museum, and I see it as a place where you can go, like she said, and have family history in an area of it, a database, a computer, some style of online, an assistant there, not necessarily paid assistants. We're very aware of the cost associated with doing things, and all the plans need to be laid out later. We've already decided that if you're going to have a museum, it will have to be fresh every so often. Now, fresh means it can't be older people, or in a small town like this, in other words, we propose that every quarter we'll feature something different. It doesn't mean change everything in there, but feature something different. Maybe it could be feature the Venable family because of the history, and the Morton family, and in other words, a feature. In other words, here is data, here is artifacts, and Bob and I personally don't feel like it's going to be a difficult problem to borrow and gather up, have loaned to us. Some people may give, but some people would rather keep their heirlooms, but allow other people to view them. So we don't see a problem with having interesting things for the public to come see. Now, as far as whether you charge to come through a museum, I don't see how you set a price on it, but all of that stuff is in the future, works too. But I do think you have to ask for some style of donation, because it will cost money to operate. We may propose a foundation, because a foundation seems to be a way to get public monies, and no matter whether I'm speaking frankly, if the Farmville Historical Society, Farmville-Prince Historical Society, will say is no longer in existence, the foundation is still in existence for the museum. So the entities could be two individual things, and it could stay under possibly a family trust. Now, all of that stuff is detail that lawyers and accountants need to work out. And I'm sure that anybody donating such valuable property wants the maximum tax advantage.
Blackstone has had some problems through the years with sports capital. I mean, we did a lot of things down there with sports capital, but it's like 20 or 30 years later, and the building itself in the town of Blackstone sports capital is beginning to deteriorate, and, you know, I understand what you're saying.
I'm not trying to put a damp on it, don't get me wrong. I'm pitching it out that it will be a good project, worthwhile, and workable if people get behind it. That's what you're saying. And I think people will get behind it. I think people here, especially I believe the town of Farmville, would love to have a museum that's Farmville Museum. Not singling it out as just a Farmville Museum, but one within their boundaries.
In other words, it's in the works. A lot has to be finalized, a lot has to be investigated, but it's in the works.
it's a rather generous proposition. And sometimes somebody wants to give you, well, we'll just say, a piece of junk with a high valuation, especially for tax purposes. And that is a ruse that's been used for years. But this is a perfectly good, wonderful, well-kept house that doesn't need painting, doesn't need the floors fixed, doesn't need the roof fixed.
Hopefully the basement doesn't leak.
And the 4.5, 5 years at least.
It's just a good thing. And as we are members of the Historical Society and yes, who's come here, everyone usually picks up some artifact or some data along his walk in life that was granddaddy's or even your neighbor's personality of some description. You have it, but it needs to be shared so that somebody else knows about it.
Anything you want to add, Bob?
Mr. Doyne, do you have anything to respond to about it?
No, it sounds good, but putting it into practice will be rather
Don't underestimate the children.
true. Young people can do things now that we never thought of.
Well, they are the ones that do things. Old men dream dreams. Young people carry about, I guess. But I think it's a great idea. And I'm real appreciative that I'm glad that it's been brought to the Historical Society early on in its formation. And however it's done, I'm sure the Historical Society will be an absolute part of it. I know I will first.
Absolutely. Billy, if we can close tonight, I guess I'd just like to ask our panel one last question. In lights of the events that have transpired in the last week, how did this affect you, your psyche, as opposed to Pearl Harbor? Was this more devastating or not nearly, or how did you feel about this?
Well, it's pretty simple. This is going to be hard for me or anybody else to do anything about it. Pearl Harbor was easy enough. We knew what to do, and we did it.
How to find them and where they were.
That's it.
You can do it this time. Well, the sad thing about this thing with the harbor, so many of those people that think that way right here in this country. And putting a finger on them is very difficult. In this country, not the country.
Jealousy is a hard thing to get around in the whole world is jealous of us. It makes it hard to handle.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Val. I'm glad that y'all delivered all those good memories to us, and I appreciate the good crowd again. Thank you, John. We'll do more of it.
I wanted to hear more, and I think people would understand.
Speak to the Bible.
Steve Wall wants to do an article in the paper. He wants to do it, but we were waiting till we were going to meet. It's pretty much public. But we were hoping to research how the original child because that's what's going on.
Yes, please.